After the meal we're going to enjoy some light music, listening to the orchestra of the brain. Jan Booij is Professor of Nuclear Medicine in the AMC, the Academic Medical Center in Amsterdam, and his specialty is the imaging of the brain, and as you all know, the brain is the most important organ of the human body, at least according to the brain. He will be accompanied by Prof van Velden, a young clinical physicist from the LUMC who is responsible for the new PET CT system. They will explain to us that nuclear medicine techniques like PET and SPECT are extremely well suited for imaging the brain and its diseases.
Thank you, Fritz, for this nice introduction. First of all, we heard this morning from a claimant that's always a nuclear medicine physician that's younger than the other one. I'm afraid that is not true for this session, although maybe claimant still thinks that I'm very young. Thank you. So, what I would like to do in the next 10 minutes is just to explain to you a study which we are really looking forward to perform here in Leiden, so a brain PET study in collaboration with LUMC. In fact, what we wanted to do in that study is to look into the pathogenesis, why people with autism have an increased chance to develop psychosis. So what I want to do is to introduce to you the background of that study. So it starts with chronic psychosis, if you wish, or schizophrenia, which is a very severe psychiatric disease. So approximately 1 out of 200 subjects are suffering from this disease. I think most of you are aware of the positive symptoms, like hallucinations, and most of the time you can treat them quite well with antipsychotics. But on the other hand, negative symptoms like social withdrawal or cognitive symptoms are much harder to treat, and in fact they predict the negative future for these patients. Typically the disease starts in young adults, and one of the major problems in this disease is more than 50% of these patients will suffer from long-term psychiatric problems, and 1 out of 5 will suffer from chronic symptoms and disability. Already in the 1970s, there was the first dopamine hypothesis, and it was based on 2 important clinical observations. First, all antipsychotics or neuroleptics, they block dopamine D2 receptors. And secondly, amphetamine, which induce a large increase of dopamine in the brain, can cause a psychosis. So in the past 20 years, a lot of molecular imaging studies tested this hypothesis. And that was possible because nowadays we are able to visualize and quantify parts of the dopaminergic system. So here we are looking at the major projection, dopaminergic projection in the brain, from the substantia nigra to the putamen and to the caudate. And I think most of you may believe that dopamine only has something to do with motor functions and loss of these cells in Parkinson's disease, which will cause the clinical motor symptoms of Parkinson's. But dopamine is also well known as for its functions in motivation, reward, and also to a lesser extent in cognition. So nowadays we are able to visualize dopamine release in the brain in this rate. So we do have tracers that label dopamine receptors, and in fact here we're looking at the terminal of a dopaminergic cell, and when it releases dopamine there is competition for binding for tracers to these dopamine receptors, which are localized predominantly postsynaptically. So in other words, what we can do nowadays is test the hypothesis if there is indeed, if there are indeed alterations in the dopaminergic systems which may cause that the dopamine, the dexamphetamine induced psychosis. So this is the paradigm. So here in the baseline situation, we are looking at dopamine D2 receptors, then amphetamine is administered, so it induces a huge increase in dopamine, and then there is competition for binding. So in other words, this difference reflects the dopamine release in the brain induced by the administration of dexamphetamine. So then you can also use this kind of paradigms in patients, of course, and compare them to healthy controls. So that's also what they did. So here they looked at the release of dopamine in healthy controls and compared them to a group of patients suffering from schizophrenia. And indeed you can see here that there is more release of dopamine in these patients suffering from schizophrenia. Here's a second example. So the first one was a PET study, but also, for example, with SPECT, you can look at the dopamine release. And again, in the second sample patient, they can show here the release of dopamine induced by dexamphetamine in healthy controls. And again, it was large, the release of dopamine in schizophrenic patients. I think this is also very relevant. So in the same study, they also looked at the positive symptoms. So you see that after administration of dexamphetamine, there is an increase of the positive symptoms. And it fits well with our theory that dopamine shows a close relationship with the positive symptoms in schizophrenia. But this also shows you that it can be dangerous to use this kind of techniques just in patients that are prone to develop a psychosis. So that's one of the reasons that many other groups didn't look at the dopamine release, but they used a tracer called DOPA. And I think most of you are familiar with this tracer, for example, because you used it for the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, but also, for example, in neuroendocrine tumors. But this tracer is taken up via the amino acid transporter, and it is then decarboxylated and stored temporarily here in these vesicles. So in fact, it measures the decarboxylase activity or the dopaminergic activity. So this is how the scans look. So this is a typical DOPA PET scan in schizophrenic patients. And recently, a meta-analysis looked in all the studies that were performed, all the DOPA PET studies that were performed in schizophrenic patients. And in fact, what they could show that in the vast majority of these studies, indeed, there was an increased uptake of dopamine in this rater. So that means that there is more decarboxylase activity in schizophrenic patients than in healthy controls. The past 10 years, there's a lot of interest not only to look into schizophrenic patients, but also in subjects that are at risk to develop a psychosis. And nowadays we can recognize these subjects. They're called, for example, patients suffering from ultra-high risk to develop psychosis. And we do know that around 30% of them will develop a psychosis in the near 3 or 4 years. So a lot of studies focus, because we always hope that we can have a kind of prevention, cognitive therapy, for example, in the future. And indeed, also in this kind of studies, they can already show that also at the risk groups of patients or subjects for developing psychosis, there is already increased uptake of DOPA in this striatum, and particularly in some small parts of this striatum. For example, the associative instead of the sensomotor area. This is just to show you, so there are parts of this striatum, some of them more related to the motor function, and other ones, here for example, more the ventral area, the associative area, they're more related to motivation. So nowadays it's very important that we also can measure within parts of the striatum. And then resolution, of course, is very important, and so we should use this modern PET system to look into these parts of the striatum. We also know that there are many risk factors to develop schizophrenia. Here are a number of them. For example, membership from ethnic minority group, low IQ, illicit drug use, childhood trauma. And in the past years, there have been attempts to find a common denominator for all these kind of risk factors. There's now a very important theory. It's called the social defeat hypothesis, and one of the major authors of the study is also here in this room, and he defined the social defeat hypothesis. There's several definitions, but I like this one particularly. So that means that one is being excluded from the majority group. So a lot of risk factors, but also protective factors for development of psychosis. Also genes involved. But maybe this is the denominator for all these, why some of them will develop schizophrenia. And here you can see maybe the social feeds may lead to a sensitization of the dopaminergic system. So this maybe is the reason that there is intense uptake of dopa in this striatum in at-risk subjects. Just to show you two examples that indeed these risk factors are associated with increased dopa uptake. Here, for example, in this large studies in 67 subjects, they looked whether or not these adults experienced severe sexual or physical abuse when they were a child. In fact, what they could show that also in these at-risk subjects, there was already an increased uptake of dopa in these striatum. We also looked at the mechanism why people with severe hearing impairment does show an increased risk for developing psychosis. So we included 90 healthy controls. Again, we didn't look at the dopa uptake, but at the dopamine release induced by dexamphetamine. Normal situation, and we could show in these patients, although they were not psychotic, but had very mild psychotic symptoms, that there was an increased dopamine release. So we hope that we can start next year in a collaboration with Professor Selt, but also with LUMC, into this hypothesis. We do know that people suffering from autism have an increased risk to develop psychosis, with an odds ratio between 5 to 6, so it's a really risk factor. And we want to test the hypothesis if there is indeed an increased rate of dopamine synthesis capacity in these patients, and particularly in a small part of this striatum. I think this is a very nice example of a collaboration with all kinds of groups throughout the Netherlands. For example, the dopa will be produced at Alkmaar, conform GMP production. Here we will make the scans and analyze them. And there's also the collaboration with Professor Selt, who is working at GGZ in Leiden, also Maastricht, but also, for example, with Professor van Amersfoort, who is a psychiatrist, and she's very common in the field of psychosis. So the first part, I would like to conclude that schizophrenia is associated with a hyperactive dopaminergic systems, but also that is true for all kind of risk factors for developing psychosis in the future. And we would like to test the hypothesis if this is also true in autism spectrum disorder. Flourish.
So then, what are the requirements for these F-dopa studies? As Jan already explained, we're looking at a very small part of the striatum, so it's a very small brain structure. And for this, we want to have a PET scanner that has ideally a high sensitivity and a high resolution. As Dennis Schaart explained to us, there are modern PET scanners on the market that show at least a higher sensitivity and in general also a little bit higher resolution. And indeed, by using resolution modeling technique, we can even improve the resolution. However, as been shown in previous studies, there might be problems associated to high resolution and high sensitivity, as I will come to next. So, actually I did, as a PhD student, a lot of research on a high sensitivity and high resolution brain scanner. That was, amongst others, there was one at the Free University Medical Center, and it has a smaller field of view, so it only fits a brain or smaller, or like the head, I mean, not just the brain. It has like a depth of interaction, so it has 2 layers of crystals, and therefore it has a very high resolution, sensitivity, and also a high resolution because of the small field of view. I did a lot of research together with Adriaan Lambertsma and Ronald Boulaert, and that resulted in, like, first of all we started with a phantom study. A phantom kind of resembles the human body, and in this case this phantom resembles the human brain. And it resembles a tracer study of FTG, here you see the phantom, and it has a lot of slabs, and putting it together you will get like an FTG uptake pattern of the brain. And we acquired that for like an hour of scanning, which is far longer as we would normally do in the clinic, and also a lot shorter, up to like 10 seconds. We normally, when we do brain studies, we want to follow the dynamics of the tracer. So like where it goes up in the brain, we want to see how it binds to the receptors and how it releases from the receptors. And therefore we want to put frames of like 5 seconds, 10 seconds, up to like 300 seconds. So therefore we also want to look at what the quantification will do with short acquisition times. We did that for various of reconstruction algorithms. And then we looked with this phantom to the grey matter uptake and to the white matter uptake. So when we're looking at the grey matter uptake, you see here a couple of reconstruction algorithms, and for 1 hour you will see that it approximates 1.0. So here the PET scanner can actually accurately get the activity concentration out of the grey matter. However, when we're looking at shorter acquisition times, you will see this algorithm will show a bias of 20, and these algorithms will show a negative bias of 10%, while there's only one reconstruction algorithm that shows no bias. So when we're looking at the white matter, we see a similar pattern, where most reconstruction algorithms show bias in the white matter, up until like more than 100% or like 25%. Only one reconstruction algorithm showed no bias. So then you might think, if this is true for like phantom studies, would this impact our clinical studies? And that we also try to assess. And here you see 2 images that were acquired on the HRT, and then we try to get the most stable parameter out, but then also using a reference tissue, so you could expect to have problems with bias. And then you will see that, oops, sorry, wrong button. For the standard reconstruction that's supposed to be quantitatively accurate, you see high uptake, while for the regular OSDM, you will see low uptake. So you do see clinical effects. So we repeated this study 10 years later, because there were a lot of advances in the reconstruction algorithms and in the correction strategies behind it. And we acquired the tracers, 3 different tracers with different uptake patterns, and we acquired them on a standard clinical PET CT scanner, or PET scanner, no CT yet, which was supposed to be very quantitatively accurate. And we scanned the same patient on the HRT. Then we obtained images, as you could see here. These are the images from the HRT, and these are the images from the HR+, which is the routine clinical PET CT scanner. And you see that these are more blurred compared to the HRT, which you could expect because the resolution of the HRT is much better. So we could actually make them the same by smoothing these images so the resolution is matched. And you will see visually that between the HR+ and HRT, those are quite similar. However, we also looked at the differences then for all these patients. This is for one typical tracer, for the more simple parameter. And you see that these are mostly on the line of identity. However, when we look at the more difficult parameter, which is this one, you will see they're much more spread. And if you leave those 2 patients out, you will see that most are actually under the line of identity. So the HR+, so the routine clinical PET scanner, shows higher values than the HRT. So this actually shows that the bias in reconstruction still, even after 10 years, has problems for the quantification. So then what would have this an impact for? Well, suppose you would do multi-center trials and you want to combine one scanner with the other. If the results are not the same, you cannot really pull them together, so that will be a huge issue. But also when you do longitudinal studies and you would change your scanner along the way, when you're doing one study, you would also not be able to pull this data. And this was actually acknowledged in a commentary by Volker and Sossi. And they also stated that because the PET scanners become more and more complex in technology, as we're using digital PET scanners, we're getting better time of flight performances, etc. If we want to maintain the quantitative accuracy of the PET scanners, we should validate them, not just only by using phantoms, but also using clinical data. So what we cannot measure by just using phantoms are unforeseeable effects. And this is something that we published last year, where we looked at those tracer studies, and then again with the tracer with a generally low uptake, which is shown on the top, and the one with high uptake, which is shown on the bottom. For the one with the low uptake, you will see high uptake also in the skull compared to the middle. And there you see that actually if the patient is acquired with any correction techniques, you will see here a black hole, which might be difficult to see on this beamer, but it's not something you would expect for this patient. And we actually found out it was actually due to very small motion, like up to 2 or 3 millimeters, where the patient, because they need to lay down for 90 minutes, was moving a little bit. Was maybe like relaxing their muscles and just tilted their heads a little bit. And therefore the scatter correction went wrong. And we actually found out that if we changed the scatter correction a little bit, we were able to remove this black hole. And you also see here, this is a difference image, that it made a huge impact for this patient, which were not really seen for tracers that did not show a relatively high uptake in the skull. So in conclusion, I could say that before we do anything, we need to at least compare different scanners using the phantoms. But this cannot really show all effects. And ideally, we should scan a patient or a couple of patients at least on one scanner and on the other scanner to see if at least we can match them. However, even if we do find differences, it will be hard though to explain them. So we need to dive into why these would be different. However, it was also acknowledged in the commentary that this is indeed a useful technique. And then maybe also, because the standardization now is for oncology, we should also look for standardization in brain studies where we could maybe find ways to solve this, maybe with using phantoms which might be more complex by using, for example, 3D printing. So, as Jan already told, we have a lot of people which we're collaborating with. The PI of this study is Jean-Paul Selten, and we also are working together with Alkmaar, of course with LUMC, and also with the Faculty of Health, Medicine and Life Sciences in Maastricht with Professor van Amersfoort. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention.